Welcome back to those who've just tuned in. You're still watching Finweek Money Matters. Our investment experts and financial advisors around the world agree that a balanced portfolio comprised of equity, bonds, listed property and offshore exposure is the safest and most effective way to make your money work for you. Over the past 10 years, inflation rose at 6.1% per year, while the JSE All Share grew by 16.3%. While should your investment strategy place a greater focus on hedging against ordinary lifestyle expenses like food and clothing and education, today we debate the merits of a lifestyle hedge portfolio. Joining me is still with me now is the Finweek journalist Kristia van Heerden, Alex Funk, he's the head of asset consulting at GCI Asset Management, and Sydney Sekese, a certified financial planner. Thank you, gentlemen, for making the time to join us. I'm going to start with you, Sydney. Kristia earlier on was telling me that there's no silver bullet and we need to be looking at a balanced portfolio. This hedging for your portfolio, it's not a new concept, is it? And maybe explain that to us before we get on to how we get a balanced portfolio.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the opportunity. Without diverting from discussion, it's very interesting how inflation has progressed over the year. We talk of 20 years of liberation, 20 years of democracy. Have you ever thought of 20 years of inflation? I mean, petrol 20 years ago was 173. Right now it's hovering around 14 rands. So inflation is like a debilitating disease, and rightfully so. If you stick to your balance fund mentality, you're sure to maintain the purchasing power of your accumulated investments.
So we talk about a balanced fund and equities and talk about bonds. What should you have in there first, and how does one even begin to know what stock to choose?
So I think it's important when assessing your retirement portfolio, because effectively that's what the guests are out there looking for. So I think even a more important approach than just a pure balanced fund is to look at diversifying your assets. Now that's key in putting a portfolio together. There's an age-old argument of not having all your eggs in one basket, and by following a multi-managed approach, you can actually achieve that diversification process. If you look at many fund of funds, multi-managed segregated mandates over history, not comparing always upside returns, but drawdown and volatility, they always come out top. So not with side widening away from the topic of hedging lifestyle expenses with inflation and equity and so on. Rather think of creating that balanced portfolio, not only with a stock portfolio or a bond portfolio, but a stock, a bond portfolio, a property portfolio within a multi-managed strategy. That will definitely be the key to success in generating CPI plus 2, 3, depending on your risk objective.
So, Alex, you are the man responsible for bursting my lifestyle hedge bubble.
That's right.
So, can you explain why you don't think that this is a good idea?
Right. So there's a couple of arguments that one can have, but I think the first and most important argument that you must consider is what is inflation and how does it transpire into equity and the returns and so forth. So think of a company. Think of any company, a Mr. Price, a Woolies, ShopRite, a Pick n Pay. They have raw materials. They have costs. Some import from overseas, some produce locally. There's still costs. Now these costs increase with inflation, currency fluctuations, demand, supply, etc. Now your argument is that the retailer or the consumer staples firm can actually transfer that cost to the consumer. Now the number one argument that you're defying here is that price elasticity of demand is positive, ceteris paribus. So we know that in most scenarios that is negative. So think of ShopRite. Right? ShopRite has not been a favorable stock over the last couple of years, mostly because it couldn't transfer the price increases to consumers. Right? A lot of their consumers were under the credit crunch. We know the demise of African banks had an impact on many of the unemployed and striking workers. So already there you can see that inflation cost cannot be transferred to revenue levels in order to return higher stock prices. Effectively, that's all it is. A future earning of a stock is releasing a future dividends. Future dividends can't be released if you can't pass on inflation costs. So that's the first argument for discussion. Another one, which links right to that, is to consider, let's just think of general monetary policy. Let's not try and overcomplicate things, but when inflation peaks, what does the Reserve Bank do? That's the question. They raise they do interest rate hikes. Simple. Interest rate hikes means that the lower end of the consumer market can't afford their bond anymore. their car payments, their overnight loans, and they spend less. As soon as they spend less, these firms generate less revenue. And
I'm just going to interject there for a little bit, Alex, and I want to come to you, Sydney.
Yes.
Alex is painting this picture, and I'm getting really nervous about it. So you're a certified financial planner. I come to you, and we're talking about diversifying. What needs to be in my portfolio in terms of what percentage are you usually working on in terms of equities, in terms of bonds, in terms of offshore exposure? What is, what's the general
basket?
Yeah, true. I think it's on a case-by-case basis, and also from individual preference in terms of risk-return profile. And again, how do you define risk? Other people define risk as a loss of 5%, others a loss of 50%. So if you can stomach a loss of 5%, it means you can afford a higher allocation to shares and even offshore. So a certified financial planner would naturally sit down with you, you'd assess your risk profile, and look at your needs in terms of short-term, long-term, and medium-term. And depending on what your long-terms are, most of the time, if your long-term goals would easily accommodate a larger exposure to shares offshore and maybe even alternative investments like hedge funds or other private equity. So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Sydney, can you tell me where ETFs fit into this picture? Because as I said to Tamisha earlier, you do get a little bit of lifestyle hedge if you put together a basket of shares with an ETF portfolio. So where do you stand on that?
It's a huge debate. Interestingly, we've been discussing with Alex. And the most prudent way is to blend the ETF with active management. And you find that depending again on your appetite for risk, if you're risk averse, you'd have more ETF than active management. And if you enjoy risk, you'd put less ETF and more active balance fund or even pure equity. Interestingly, again, going back to 20 years, I think it's my story. 20 years ago, the JSE was hovering around 5,000 level, and it was regarded as an all-time high. It's now hovering 50,000, and it's an all-time high. So again, it came with a pain, and depending on whether you can stomach that pain, you'd have enjoyed the ride. And chasing the market is also not a good idea. A balance fund ensures that you're not emotional when things turn the corner.
Alex, how do I choose the fund? So now I'm thinking, Sydney's talking about 20 years ago where the stock was. If I'm picking a stock now, should I be looking at staying in that stock for the next 5 to 10 years if I'm to pick it, if this is going to be something that needs to be in there for hedging against inflation? Yeah,
so that's an interesting argument, but I think for the benefit of the show and the audience that we have here, it's more important than not picking a stock, but picking a fund manager. So how do you select the right fund manager if you're going to preserve your retirement, buy an RA, etc.? So what we do and what I focus most of my time on is building quantitative scorecard models, if you like. So what it does is it basically assesses different fund manager styles based on return, risk metrics, Sharpe ratios, Sortino ratios. We then weight that and weight it over time. So if I'm building a low risk portfolio, I'm going to place more emphasis on the 2 to 3 year return. I reweight that, and it generally provides a quantitative answer of which funds should perform within that value. Now I know, because I'm emphasizing over 3 years, I need to hold that fund for 3 years. But that's not where it stops. Unfortunately, qualitative is just as important as quantitative. So we spend a lot of time doing due diligence, going to meet fund managers, chatting to them, making sure we understand their process, and that we actually agree with it. And I think if you follow that process and you attach it to a very carefully thought out retirement plan, matching your current assets to your retirement liability, you will not need to try these fancy hedging techniques. It just doesn't work. And I mean, I could spend the entire afternoon discussing to you why it's a terrible idea.
Unfortunately, we won't be able to get into that. So perhaps maybe this is a good time to end this and hopefully get them in again next time, where maybe you'll be breaking it down for a little breaking it down for us a little deeper. Thanks to our guest today, and that's it for Finweek Money Matters. But thanks to Alex Funk, he's the head of asset consulting at GCI Asset Management, and also to Sydney Sekese, who's a certified financial planner. Until next time, and of course, Kristia van Heerden.
Almost forgot about me.
How can I forget about you? We'll see you again next week, same time next week.
Thank you.